In our video today, I would like to continue our presentation about motivation. But let me first, before continue our subtopics in motivation or the main points we will cover about motivation, I would like first to summarize what already we looked at. Uh, as we said before, motivation can be defined as the reason or reasons one has for activity or behaving in a particular way. And we define motivation as an internal state that activates behavior and gives it direction. And the motivation is considered as a driving force behind all actions of human beings, animals, and all organisms, and it could be seen as the cause of behavior. Also, we can define motivation as the process of arousing, and we mean by arousing attention and sustaining a goal directed behavior induced by the expectation of satisfying individual needs. And as we said before, you will not be able to be motivated if you don't expect that you can get your goal. And that motivation is a circular dimension, starts with unsatisfied needs and ends with satisfied, new unsatisfied needs, and in between we have tension drives search behaviors, and if you would be able to achieve your goals, you the needs will be satisfied and the tension will reduce. So we have reduction of tension, but after that we have a new unsatisfied needs, and we will go on that way. And we have key concept in motivation. It is referred to as goal directed behavior. And we define goal directed behavior as a set of attitudes and values that influence the person to act or behave in a specific goal directed manner. So we can say that motivation is the desire to act in service of goal. And also, it is a crucial element in setting and attaining one's objectives. And as we said before, research shows that people can influence their own levels of motivation and self control. Uh, and also, we covered some about the functions of motivation, and we said that motivation has three functions, including directing or steering function, activating or energizing our actions or behaviors, and control our behaviors means influence our or affect our behavior. So it could be seen as the cause of behavior. And in addition to that, we covered in the previous video, we covered some about motivation in organization. And as we said before, in today's organization, motivation plays an important role in determining whether the company will succeed or not. And each company or organization has its desired goals, and the manager have to achieve the goals of the organization through workers. And one of the most effective way to achieve the goals of the organization is to motivate workers, means influence or change their inner drives in a way helping in improving their performance, and in turn this will help in achieving the goals of the organization. And in that case, he can use the techniques of increasing motivation, and the techniques of motivation that aim to satisfy the needs of the workers and which affect their production and achieve the goals of the organization. And he should take into account that any organization in any organization, different employees or different workers have different needs, have different motives, have different drives, and even they have the same needs, they will be different in the priorities of the satisfaction of these needs. That's all we said about the main 3 points in our presentation. Definition of motivation. Number two, functions of motivation. Number three, the role of motivation in organization. What about that already? These 3 points already we have covered in the first video. Now, what about our main topics, our main issues today? In today's presentation, we will continue our presentation about motivation in our video today, and we will introduce some issues related to number one, the two kinds of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. What do we mean by intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and what are the differences between these two kinds of motivation? And then we will deal with some related concepts such as need, drive, motive, and in addition to that, desire and incentives or goal. These concepts are referred to as related concepts or overlapped. We have some sort of overlap between these concepts, and we have to know what is the difference between these concepts. Now, what do we mean by intrinsic and extrinsic motivation? Motivation can have many sources, and according to these sources, we classify motivation into two basic categories: intrinsic or extrinsic motivation. And often people have multiple motives for engaging in any one behavior. So they may have many sources or multiple sources that motivate them or create motivation to them. The first kind of motivation, that motivation which is referred to as intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic in intrinsic motivation, the inspiration comes from within a person, not outside the person. So the desire, for example, to improve at a certain activity. This desire comes from within the individual. So we are talking about intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation tends to push people more forcefully, and the accomplishment are more fulfilling. On the other side, we have motivation that might be extrinsic, whereby a person is inspired by outside forces, such as other people or events that inspire them. So we can put the definition according to what I said. We can put the definition of the two kinds of motivation: intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. This is the definition of intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation, it refers to motivation that comes from within the individual instead of from outside. It is within. So the inspiration comes from within the individual, such as a desire to improve at a certain activity, for example, and intrinsic motivation, as I said, push people more forcefully, and the accomplishment are more fulfilling. And it occurs when people are internally motivated either to do something because it either brings them pleasure. They will be happy if they do this activity, do in that way, and they or they think it is important, what they are do is very important, or they feel that what they are learning or doing is significant. All of these included in intrinsic motivation. And all of these, they are internally motivated. They are internally motivated, not externally motivated. And you have to remember that our religion, either we are Muslims or Christians, entail help other without or doing something without expecting anything in return. So our religion entail extrinsic motivation. What about the extrinsic motivation? On extrinsic motivation, this is the definition of extrinsic motivation. It comes from outside of the individual. This is from within the individual. But in extrinsic motivation, it is outside of the individual. And we have some common extrinsic motivation, such as rewards like money, grades, coercion. If I am going to coerce you to do something, in that way, you are externally motivated, not internally motivated. Or threat of punishment, also a crowd cheering, trophies, all of these are extrinsic motivation. What about competition? Competition is some sort of extrinsic motivation, because in competition you are interested in how to win or how to beat others, not to enjoy the intrinsic rewards or to enjoy the activity itself. So competition is classified as extrinsic motivation. So examples of extrinsic motivation including money, grades, all reinforcers or rewards that you can get. Also coercion, also threat of punishment, competition, cheering, trophies, all of these are extrinsic motivation. Now, I would like to give you an example of an example illustrating the difference or show us the difference between extrinsic and extrinsic motivation, between being internally motivated and externally motivated. For example, if I asked someone to help a person with disability, for example, blind person, blind one, I mean, he has blindness. I would like you to help him in writing down this presentation, for example. And I promise you or someone a bonus of 5 marks or reinforcing him with some money, for example. Then he already does what I asked him to do. Now imagine we have two persons. One starts nagging me or following me for the bonus in return. In that case, this person is classified as externally motivated. But the second one refuses the bonus by addressing that he does because people should integrate and help each other. And you have to remember that when our religion, either we are Muslims or Christians, entail help other without expecting any thing in return. The second person could be classified as an internally motivated, not externally motivated. So the first one asked for the bonus, he is externally motivated because he not enjoy the behavior itself, the activity itself, but he motivated by external rewards. But the second one is internally motivated because he is not interested in the bonus of 5 marks or to be reinforced by money, but he do because this is what should be done, what is expected to do, what he feels that it is important or is significant and has to be done. This is a difference between intrinsic and intrinsic motivation and between to be internally or externally motivated. Now, what about the related concepts, or what is the difference between these related concepts? So we have need, drive, motive, incentive. If we are going to define need, it is something that is necessary for organism to live a healthy life. So without these needs, we may cannot continue our life, or at least we may have damage or dysfunction. So we can differentiate between needs and wants, because needs are requirements for our life. We cannot live without them. But wants we can live without wants. If you are not able to meet your needs, this will lead to death or dysfunction. But this not happen in the case of wants. And we can classify needs into two basic categories: objective needs, or physical needs. It is referred to as objective or physical, and they are such as need for food, need for water, and so on. And also the second type is subjective or psychological needs, and they are such as self-actualization, self-esteem, or all of these are referred to as social or psychological needs or subjective needs. What about drive? If you are going to define the drive, uh, we will, the slide says, if the need is off, so drive is a need, but it is a certain kind of needs. It is of physiological origin, physiological base. If the need is of physiological base, it is referred to as drive. And also we can refer to it as a body need. It is also referred to as, so drive expresses a body need. It is called a drive, and the body needs for food, air, water, rest, warmth, all of these are drives. So because they have physiological base or physiological origin. But what about motive? If the need is of psychological or social, so the motive also is the second type of need. And you have to remember, we classified needs in this slide into objective physical and objective physical. They are drives. So drives is objective needs or physical needs or of physiological base, needs or of physiological base or origin. This, and the second type is subjective or psychological needs, and this is motive. Motive is subjective need, psychological needs, social needs. And we have two kinds of motives. The first one is psychological intrinsic motives. For example, the need for curiosity, the need for competence, the need for achievement, because they have psychological origin or psychological base. But we have a second type. It is referred to as extrinsic social motives, such as need for affiliation, need for attention, need for approval, need for dominance, need for independence. The difference between the first category, psychological, and the second one, social extrinsic motives, is that the others involved in the social motives. And because others are involved in the social motives, they are referred to as social or extrinsic motives. Okay. So we have two kinds: psychological intrinsic motives and extrinsic social motives. And you have to remember, here we are talking about motives, but we in a previous slide we were talking about motivation, and we differentiated between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. But we are here talking about something else. We are talking about motives, and we mean intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic means psychological, extrinsic means social. And we have two kinds: psychological intrinsic motives and extrinsic social motives, and should be acquainted with examples of each category of these kinds of motives. You have to remember that also motive is referred to as desire. So if I am going to ask you a question and I said, for example, both true or false, and to correct the false statement, the drive is referred to as desire. No, motive is referred to as desire. Okay. Now, what about incentive? While in the previous three slides, we were talking about the needs. And then we differentiated between physiological needs, which is referred to as drive, and the psychological social needs, which is referred to as motive. But now we are not talking about the need, but we are talking about the external thing, which is if you would be able to obtain it, you will satisfy your need and relieve or reduce tension. For example, it is also referred to as reinforcer or goal. For example, now if I am talking about the need for food, the need for food is a drive because it is a physiological needs. But what about the incentive? The food itself, it is the incentive in the case of the need for food. The need for achievement in psychology. The need for achievement in psychology, need for achievement is one kind of the psychological intrinsic motive. So are talking about motives, okay, or subjective needs, as we said before, subjective needs or psychological needs. Okay. But what about the incentive in the case of the need for achievement in psychology? In that case, the grade itself, the marks, grades are in that case, marks or grades are the incentive. Okay. So incentive, in incentive, we are talking about external thing. We are not talking about the need itself. And it was also referred to as reinforcer. Reinforcer means reward or the goal. The goal, you are seeking to obtain it in order to reduce your tension. That's all today in our video today. We covered two main points. Point number one related to the two types of sorry, the two types of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And then we differentiate between some related concepts or overlapped concepts, including need, drive, motive, and incentive. Now, I would like to summarize what I said today. Number one, we differentiate between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And as we said before, intrinsic motivation can be defined as it refers to motivations that comes from within the individual instead of from outside. And it occurs when you are motivated to do anything because it brings you pleasure, you feel happy if you do it, or because you think it is important, or you feel what you are doing or learning are very significant. But if we are going to define or if we try to define extrinsic motivation, it comes from outside of the individual, and we have some common extrinsic motivation such as rewards, money, grades, coercion. Coercion is considered as some sort of extrinsic motivation because you are coerced to do something, but you are not happy to do it, but you are coerced. So have some sort of coercion. In that case, you are externally motivated. If you are trying to avoid the threat of punishment, to avoid punishment, in that case, you are extrinsically motivated. If you are seeking to get any something like cheering or trophies. In that case, you are externally motivated. In the case of competition, you are externally motivated because you don't enjoy the behavior itself, but you are seeking to win or beat others. Then we differentiate between four main concepts: need, drive, motive, incentive. And we define need as necessary for organisms to live healthy life. And we differentiate between it and wants because if you cannot meet your needs, in that case, you that will produce dysfunction or may cause death. And already we classified the needs into objective and physical needs and psychological or subjective needs. Objective and physical, such as need for water, food, warmth, sex, and so on. Subjective psychological, such as need for affiliation, self-esteem needs, self-actualization, need for competence, and so on. And what about drive? Drive is some sort of needs, but it is characterized by physiological base or origin, and it is also referred to as a body need, and it expresses a body need, and we have some common or drives such as need for water, rest, warmth, and so on. And then we cover some about motives, and motives is a need, but characterized by psychological or social origin. And we have psychological intrinsic motives, and we mean by intrinsic psychological in that case, such as need for curiosity, competence, achievement, and extrinsic social motives. And we mean by extrinsic here social motives. We mean extrinsic by extrinsic social, such as the need for affiliation, attention, approval, dominance, and independence. But if we are talking about incentive, we are talking about something else, something. We are not talking about the need itself, but we are talking about the external thing. That if you would be able to obtain it, this will reduce your tension and satisfy your need. It is also referred to as reward or reinforcer or goal. That's all today about the two main points we covered that related to the two types of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic, and some related or overlapped concepts such as need, wants, motive, desire. And desire, as I said before, is referred to as motive, drive, body need, and incentive. Thank you so much.